afternoon. My name is Wendy Belzer, and on behalf of the Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame Committee, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's luncheon, the 2018 Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame induction. We want to thank you for joining us for this special occasion to celebrate Women's History Month, and more specifically, the life and achievements of a very remarkable woman in the history of Georgetown County, Julia Mood Peterkin, whom we are inducting today as the 8th Distinguished Member of the Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame. During our program, which will begin with dessert, you will learn a good deal about Julia Peterkin, a remarkable author of South Carolina and the first Southern novelist to win a Pulitzer-prize for her third published novel, Scarlet Sister Mary, which was published in 1928, sold 1 million copies, and was awarded the Pulitzer-prize for fiction in 1929. We are truly honored to have Julia's great-granddaughters, Amy Peterkin and Laura Peterkin, with us today. Will you please stand for just a moment? We're delighted to have Cokie Roberts join us as our guest speaker to help us honor Julia Peterkin. We welcome our elected officials in attendance today, Mayor Brendan Barber of the City of Georgetown and Georgetown County City Council members Rudolph Bradley and Al Joseph. I would like to thank my fellow committee members and representatives of our presenting organizations who are with us here today, all of whom are listed in your printed program. Thank you all for your support of the Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame. It is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ron Days, Vice President for Creative Education at Brook Green Gardens, who will offer the blessing. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I will precede the lesson with a brief reading that I'm sure you'll find familiar. The Lord me shepherd, I have everything what I need. He make me for rest in green field, and He lead me to the still water, where fresh and good for drink. It take me soul and hit him back where He's supposed to be. It'll lead me along the right path for His name's sake, saying like it been a promise. Although I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I ain't gonna fail of no evil, Lord, cause under that, long side me. On a rod and on a staff, protect me. Under them prepare enough bill for me, where all me enemy can shun. Wanna give me hearty welcome. Wanna night me head with oil and fill up me cup till it run over. For true. Wanna go and love me and take care of me long as I live. And I want to stay there to own a house forever. Now, let me pray. Lord God, we great God and good shepherd, we thank honor for bringing me here this fine day. We thank honor for filling me with the bread of life, and we give me the strength for keep a climbing up and over every mountain set for me. We thank honor for all the honor them what one get the honor they done do. Bless all the bitter set for we for now. Full up we belly and full up we heart with honor love. Night we head with oil and full up we cup till it run over for truth. This we pray. And let everybody say in one voice, Amen.
Please continue your dining. Please continue at your tables dining. As we begin our program today, because you know how very excited we are, first of all, excited that each and every one of you have shown an interest in the Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame. We're very excited to bring this program to Georgetown County to honor the many women who have been a part of our history. My name is Lee Brockington, and I proudly serve on the committee representing Cokie. And when we think of history in general, so often it is great men and great events. So much of our recorded world history has been focused on men, the wars they led, the offices they held, the business they accomplished. History, whether it is world history or U.S. history, really it is all local history. And every one of us here loves South Carolina history. In 1929, as Wendy Belcher said earlier, Julia Peterkin received a Pulitzer-prize for literature for her novel, Scarlet Sister Mary, the story of an independent black woman on a South Carolina plantation. Her account of the Gullah people won praise and scorn and provoked an outcry, the banning of her books, and then, surprisingly, the massive reprinting of her book. As a white author, Julia Peterkin received high praise from a black scholar for having the eye and the ear to see beauty and to know the truth. Julia Peterkin's biographer, who's with us here today, Susan Williams, wrote, "Julia's writing helped shape the sexual and racial attitudes of America between the two world wars." A South Carolina educational television documentary, filmed in part at Cokie, featured the life of Julia Peterkin with all its twists and turns. And today we get to think about sex and race and politics and certainly banned books. See how interesting women's history is? And our speaker today has covered much of the history of our world and our nation as a senior analyst, a senior news analyst for the National Public Radio, where she won the congressional correspondent, has been a congressional correspondent for over 10 years. Cokie Roberts has been a political commentator for ABC News and has covered politics, Congress, and public policy for World News Tonight and other ABC broadcasts. Cokie has also co-anchored ABC's This Week with Sam Donaldson for many years. She's been a regular roundtable analyst for This Week with George Stephanopoulos. A native of New Orleans, the daughter of a U.S. Representative Hale Boggs, a daughter of a congresswoman and ambassador to the Vatican, her mother Lindy Boggs, her sister, the former mayor of Princeton, New Jersey, her brother, an attorney in Washington, D.C. Cokie Roberts has lived and breathed American history. A graduate of Wellesley College, Cokie is married to the professor and journalist and author, Steve Roberts, and together they have a syndicated weekly column. Their daughter, Rebecca, was the featured author at last week's Movable Feast here at Waukesha in this spot. Rebecca Roberts spoke to us on women suffragists in Washington, D.C., the famous march. Cokie Roberts, as a journalist, covered Hurricane Katrina and the BP oil spill in the Gulf, both affecting her hometown, and both topics, hurricanes and oil spills, of interest to us as residents of this area. Cokie and her husband are both part-time Pawleys Island residents, owning a beach house on Pawleys Island, and they have vacationed here since the early 1970s. Part-time residents, but a full-time commitment to our community is one way that Cokie impacts each one of our lives. Her books featuring important women are well known. Capital Dames, The Civil War, and the Women of Washington. Founding Mothers, the women who raised our nation. Ladies of Liberty, and also a book, We Are Our Mother's Daughters. Whether we wanted to be or not, we have become our mother's daughters. Cokie is here today to celebrate Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame, to help all of the sponsoring organizations induct yet another intriguing woman who observed life in the Low Country, who gathered strength and inspiration from the environment and from the people. Cokie Roberts, with 20 honorary degrees, a number of Emmys for her work on ABC, and named by the Library of Congress as a living legend. Help me welcome Cokie Roberts.
much, Lee, and thank you all for being here and for these wonderful organizations that are sponsoring this event. Every single one of them is something that I feel strongly about. I have my Walkabout Library card in my purse, but so many great things. And yes, this room, my daughter spoke here on Friday, so it's a lot of Roberts in one week. But we're both talking about remarkable women from roughly the same period. So she talked about the women's 1913 March on Washington, and then the progression to finally ratifying the suffrage amendment in 1920, not even 100 years ago. My subject started a public career in the 1920s, and I can't help but think that the success of the suffragists probably gave Julia Mood Peterkin the courage to pursue the passion. We have, as you heard earlier, some Peterkins and Chandlers in the room, so it is a treat to have all of you here listening to stories that you probably can tell better than I. But it's nice that you're honoring your ancestry. But before I do talk about this extraordinary author, I do want to say a word of thanks to this community. You've been so welcoming to me and our family. But as you heard, I am from the South, and I know it takes several generations to be a native. But you have made us feel at home, and we do now have 3 generations who have been coming. I want to say particularly thanks to my dear friend Harriet Clouden. She and her late husband Bob really people made us feel so especially welcome here and become such dear friends. And Al Joseph is here from Georgetown City. Al's sister Mary Lou and I worked together for many years, and she and her husband John have also been great welcomers, and they took fabulous care of Al and Mary Lou's mother, Louise, who was an unbelievable lady, fit as a fiddle, until the day she died, as she always said. And Vicki Crafton, I don't think is here, but what great work she has done carrying on Tom Warner's, her husband's work at Richfield Books. What a contribution to the community that bookstore has. And of course, Lee Rockington, who has done so much for this community in so many ways. I'm particularly grateful to you, Lee, for introducing me to Miss Ruby's Kids. Because first of all, that's a wonderful organization and does important work. We do know now that the only way that you break the cycle of poverty is through early childhood education. And so having Miss Ruby's Kids as a resource in the community is terribly important. But also it was a treat because by extension, I got to know Miss Ruby and the incredible work that she did. This is a community of communitarians, people who care about it and who want to make it better in every way while preserving the wonderful history and the beautiful past. So I'm thrilled to be part of it. I would guess that Julia Peterkin was actually more of a loner than a communitarian. Am I just part of it? It's the right place. I'll just hold. She was a woman who listened more than she talked. Unusual. She particularly listened to the creativity and cadence of the Gullah language, the first language that she learned to speak. And you know, that was true of a lot of white Southerners. At one point, Bob Plowden cleaned up and got ready to be observed a little burial ground at the reserve, an Alston cemetery. And one of the descendants of the people buried there said he didn't speak English till he was 6. Gullah was the only language that he knew. And that speaks to the fact that many of us, of both races, particularly in the South, were raised by strong black women with very firm views about what was respectable and what was not. And boy, did we get in trouble if we were not respectable. So after Julia Peterkin became famous, her grandmother was quoted as saying that it wasn't respectable for a woman to appear in the newspaper. But I think that grandmother couldn't hold a candle to Mom Hannah, the matriarch of the quarters in Julia Peterkin's works in determining what was respectable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The press release promoting this great event tells a great deal about our honoree. How she was left motherless as a toddler, sent to live, she was born in 1880, sent to live with her grandparents while her siblings stayed with their father, who remarried. How she graduated from Converse College at age 16, was awarded a master's at 17, and then went to Fort Knott to teach. There she married the owner of a large cotton plantation, which employed somewhere around 400 to 500 black workers. How shocking her work was considered until in 1929, as you've heard, she became the first Southern writer, not Faulkner, not O'Connor, not Mitchell. It was Julia Peterkin who was the first Southern writer to win the prestigious Pulitzer-prize. The award-winning book, Scarlet Sister Mary, sold, as you heard, more than 1 million copies. That's still today, as I can tell you as an author. A very remarkable achievement. In 1929, it was unheard of. And she sold them not only in English, but also in Spanish. And hers was the first American novel to be published in what was called the featherweight airplane edition, that we now call a paperback. All of that you have there. But here's what I think is absolutely crazy. Until I got this assignment to talk about her today, I had never heard of her. And I write women's history. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Unthinkable to me that should be true. But it is, and I suspect it's true for many of you. And I know it's true for people outside of South Carolina. So it's so outrageous, really, that we don't keep these women alive, that we don't tell their stories the way Peterkin told the stories of the people she admired. So that's why we have our month, our Women's History Month. We get one a year. I keep asking about the other 11. And I really do think that we have to keep it going throughout the year. Say with Black History, the other 11. I've written a couple of kids' books based on my grown-up books about women of the founding era and the New Republic. And I go into schools and I say to kids, is there anything missing in all those pictures you see of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and all that? And the little boys will say something ridiculous. They'll say, well, there was a symbol on the sword. What are you talking about? And finally, one of the children, it's usually a girl, but sometimes a boy, will say, women. There are no women in those pictures. And I'll say, what, do you think there were women then? They get very giggly because, of course, this question implies sex. And they say, yes, and I say, how do you know? Oh, there's no evidence. There's no evidence of it. And they'll say, finally, some child will say, well, because there couldn't be men without women. Good point. So I have made it my mission to try to tell the stories, but I didn't know this story. And I'm no literary critic, so I will not attempt an exegesis of Peterkin's work, though when I learned from the excellent South Carolina Encyclopedia, thank you, Walter Edgar, that Scarlet Sister Mary was considered racy and subversive in its time, I certainly got interested. And it is definitely a good read. I will admit to not having read her other novels. President Trump has kept me busy. But now I plan to. So instead of trying to do any kind of a literary analysis, I'll try to do what I do know how to do, and that's talk about the historical period when Julia Peterkin lived. In 1880, when she was born, the post-Civil War South was on its knees economically and seething racially. But many of the formerly enslaved people stayed on the plantations in their quarters, as they were known, doing the work they had always done, not quite knowing what else to do. And you know, that was still true when I was a child growing up in the 1950s. I would go to a relative who was actually my grandmother's second husband's sister's husband. And we would go and stay at his plantation up in the country in Cokie Roberts, Louisiana. And there were still quarters. And I would go and spend a huge amount of my time there because that was the most interesting place to be with Aunt Irene and Aunt Mary Alice and Uncle Walter. So I recognize what she's talking about in these books. But it was a terrible time here. It was what was known as the era of lynchings. That's what it came to be called. And Governor Ben Tillman, who was elected when Julia was 10, supported lynching, along with his imposition of Jim Crow laws. To his supporters, he was the champion of white men's rule and women's virtue. So that was the South Carolina that little Julia Mood, abandoned by her father, the doctor, grew up in. It's a familiar picture, thankfully absent the lynching, that many of us grew up in. But she was clearly ready to make something of herself, even in this world of virtuous women. Most American women didn't go to college until well into the 20th century. Actually, little known women's fact, it was the GI Bill that sent women to college as well as men. And 50,000 women, to be exact, ish. And so it was really extraordinary that little Julia Mood, at age, what was she, probably 13 or so, went to Converse College. Now, the University of, this would have been the mid-1890s, University of South Carolina, much to my surprise and delight, did admit white women in the mid-1890s, which was highly unusual. She went to Converse and graduated at 16, then still a teenager, got her master's, and then hied herself off alone. I can't get over this. At that point, a girl alone, to Fort Mott to teach. Now, Fort Mott, not exactly your glamorous spot, and in the middle of nowhere. I mean, she might have been inspired by a story I tell in Founding Mothers about, and I'm sure you know the story of Rebecca Mott, the fabulous mistress of the Mott plantation. During the Revolutionary War, the British had run her out, and they had taken over her manor house, and she was living in a farmstead nearby. And Generals Marion and Lee came to her and said, "Oh, Mrs. Mott, we're really sorry because, you know, you've sacrificed so much. Your husband's dead. Your son-in-law Thomas Pinkney's in jail, you know, being held prisoner. You've lost a son, but we need to burn down your house. And we need to get the British out. We need to capture them. We need to move on to Charleston." And she said, "No problem." And according to family lore, gave them the method with which to burn the house, which were some arrows that her husband had been given in the West Indies that were supposed to ignite upon impact. And according to the story, that all worked. Arrows went, and actually one of her descendants writes, by the way, that the arrow case was later used by the family for knitting needles, which I just love, because, you know, it's not only a swords into plowshare story, but it's so practical. But at any rate, the house catches fire, the British come out, they put out the fire, and the British are captured, and then they all sit down to dinner together. The American generals, the British generals, and Mrs. Mott, who was a serving them, and General Lee, Lighthouse Harry Lee, wrote in his memoir, "The deportment and demeanor of Mrs. Mott gave a zest to the pleasures of the table. Conversing with ease, vivacity, and good sense, she obliterated our recollection of the injury she had received. So there was Julia Mood in Fort Mott, and in 1903, at age 23, which meant she was an old maid. I got married at 22, and I was an old maid in 1966. So she married the owner of Lang Syne, Julia Peterkin. She had one child delivered by her father, Dr. Mood, and then, presumably while she was still out, he, with the consent of her husband, tied her tubes. So he kept doing her wrong. She was bored in what was already the archaic mission of being a plantation mistress, and so she seems to have spent most of her time in the quarters, listening to and learning from the people who lived there. Now keep in mind, this was at the same time that the KKK had reared again in the early around 1915. Its sheet-covered head. And the Klan was so popular that the Speaker of the South Carolina House held a barbecue at their headquarters. But she soldiered on and apparently told the stories she had heard from her African mentors to her piano teacher. A lady was allowed to travel to take piano lessons. That was acceptable even for a virtuous woman. He encouraged her to write down the stories. She was smart enough to know that she needed to learn more about writing. And so secretly, so her husband wouldn't know, she took a correspondence course in magazine writing. Think of how, the ingenuity that this required. Sitting there in the middle of nowhere on a plantation. And then she did something even incredibly bolder to me. I mean, I would never have the nerve to do this, which is that she started writing to famous authors and poets and critics, and saying, here I am, and what should I do, and pay attention to me, essentially. And she wrote to Carl Sandburg and H.L. Mencken, which was truly a brave thing to do, because Mencken had written so disparagingly of the Carolinas, charging that the area between Virginia and Georgia was a vast plain of mediocrity, stupidity, lethargy, almost of dead silence. Now, South Carolina reacted by forming the Poetry Society in 1920 in Charleston, and it was such a success that the New York Times review of the 1922 yearbook gave the organization praise for its achievement not only in poetry, but in all the sister arts. And that was about the time that Julia Peterkin, with the help of Mencken, began publishing her stories in magazines. And after a couple of years of her stories showing up in the magazines, Knopf publishers came to her and commissioned a book. It was also about the same time that the cotton economy completely collapsed, and then there was a boll weevil infestation causing such a bad harvest in 1922 that 50,000 African Americans left South Carolina, and whites started heading into the textile mills. The state did make investments in the upcountry economy, but the low country sat completely idle. Julia's father had bought up 3 plantations, including Brook Green, and she had what's described as a ramshackle house in Murrells Inlet. Do you all still have that house? No. Too bad. So she set her stories here, rather than near Fort Mott, and she transferred her characters from the cotton plantation to Brook Green, which she calls Blue Brook in her books. Her descriptions of the area so come wonderfully alive. Listen to her rendition of Sister Mary's visit to the home of the local conjurer. I picked an English part of the book to read because I can't do the Gullah justice, I should ask Mr. Days to do that for me, because much of the book is written in Gullah, as are all of her books. But here's her description of going to Daddy Kojo's cabin. It sat on a hill just above the riverbank, its weathered roof green with moss, its old cracked sides the color of the deep shadows cast around it by the twisted live oak trees. Chickens scratched around the door. A mother hog, lying under a tree, fed her babies, and when Mary passed, she blinked and grunted, but did not move. An old horse munched eagerly at a dry grass patch, and one of his eyes was white with blindness. You can totally picture it. She draws a complete scene that you can visualize with no problem whatsoever. And that's what she did. She drew pictures you could visualize and wrote dialogue that you could hear. That dialogue was mostly in Gullah. She worked to write it in a way that English speakers can read it while preserving the cadence. And as you can imagine, this drew criticism from all sides. She was really the target. Whites were wondering why she was paying so much attention to black people and investing them with such dignity. Blacks were worrying that she was appropriating their stories, their culture, their language. She did get some support from the writers of the Harlem Renaissance and the author and activist W.E.B. Du Bois, famously, and it is quoted in every single story about Julia Peterkin, Lee quoted it already today, said that she is a southern white woman but has the eye and ear to see beauty and know truth. Her Pulitzer-prize winner shocked some readers because of the sexuality of its main character and Sister Mary's proclivity for taking men to her bed. The book was, as you heard, banned in Boston, as well as in the Gaffney, South Carolina Public Library. Now keep in mind, this is when the governor, John Richards, had styled himself as a leader in righteousness. He enforced the blue laws, he outlawed gambling, and he declared swimming pools tools of the devil. So that was the world in which this book came out. Of course, all the publicity around the banning worked for her, as did the controversy around her winning the Pulitzer. The Pulitzer Committee had to eliminate the word wholesome from its criteria in order to give her the award. Then the Depression hit, and Julia Peterkin stopped writing. Were the two events connected? Who knows? It was certainly a very tough time in South Carolina where there was no safety net. In fact, the only pensions in the state were for Confederate veterans, their wives, and faithful slaves. So Peterkin's daughter-in-law quoted Julia as saying, "I'm done with all that." And maybe she simply thought she had no more stories to tell. Or maybe she faced the Depression and realized going home out of the world of New York salons was a safer place to be economically. The world was certainly changing fast around her. A promise of a town named Myrtle Beach came into being, and access to the low country improved with the opening of the Intracoastal Waterway. The New Deal brought Santee Cooper, bringing electricity to farms. Only 2% of 168,000 farms in South Carolina had electricity in 1934. Everybody went to bed with the chickens. Rural electrification, words I will never say on the radio, changed all of that. And then, of course, the war years brought prosperity to the state with the Charleston Navy Yard, which had employed African Americans from the beginning, from when it first opened in the early 20th century, but of course, during World War II, hired many women as well. All of that social change led to a fledgling civil rights movement with women like maybe Garvin Fields and Septima Clark in Charleston and Mary Monteith in Columbia leading the way. Julia Peterkin was not among them. She had made her choice. She had abandoned the glamorous world for the Fort Mont countryside. Her voice, silent. But her writing speaks volumes, and I'm so grateful that you introduced me to it. Surely, Julia Mood Peterkin's induction into the Georgetown Hall of Fame is long overdue. Thank you very much.
I want to hear a little bit more about the controversial choosing of the Pulitzer-prize. For instance, why not Faulkner? Why not one of the others that you mentioned?
Well, actually, the head of the committee had chosen another author, a man, not a Southerner. I've forgotten who it was, frankly. And went out and said that this person had won the Pulitzer Prize, and that made the committee furious because they had not yet voted, and they felt disenfranchised and mad. But they were definitely not going to give it to whoever that guy had said. So they then, she was known in New York circles at this point. And so they took the word wholesome, as it said, a promotion of wholesome American values, out and gave her the prize.
Good. Right here, Giles has a question.
So if she had to take the correspondence course secretly, was her husband supportive?
Oh, I doubt it. Susan Williams is here and can answer that better than I. But first of all, husbands in general weren't supportive. You can make a case today. But, mine is an exception, of course. But this was really going outside of her sphere, in big time, for her to be off on her own, writing first of all, and then writing what she was writing. So this was a very brave and bold thing to do.
Do we have any other clues as to why she just stopped writing? Does it feel
Well, I asked Susan today, and Susan, why don't you answer?
Aha. Susan Williams, the biographer. Let me take the microphone for a moment.
Thank you. Why did she stop writing when she did? She started when she was about 40 years old, and I thought, when I started writing this book that was, excuse me, very old, and then I soon caught up with her. She stopped 12 years later, and she had had this remarkable career, the kind of thing that usually people go through in the course of a 40-year career. She did, the Depression did hit. I think she got a little spooked by that. She never really wanted to be the breadwinner in the family. And when it seemed that she might be able to become, to go off on her own and become the breadwinner, I think that she suddenly felt that that was a very daunting prospect. But she was getting older, and many, if you look at the history of many women in this period, that's a pretty typical kind of trajectory. They would come out as kind of radical in their youth and then turn their backs on this kind of radicalism and freedom that they had espoused earlier. It was fairly easy for her to retreat back to the plantation and to the values that she had held as a younger woman. She did, I think, in part go back to take care of her family. She felt her family needed her. And the Depression, too, was a turning point in American literature where there had been this great interest in African American life and literature. And with the Depression, there was a turn towards sort of proletarian literature and socialism, the kinds of things that Steinbeck was writing. So she could feel that shifting away from her. She was not getting the same kind of praise that she had gotten earlier. And I do think she sort of ran. She told her stories, and she had
done it. She had done it. Yeah. I mean, you might have run out of stories.
And I think one more thing, and Susan and I talked a little bit about this before, she writes about it in the book, Cokie had talked about it. Julia Peterkin had a grandchild born. Raise your hand if your life changed when you had a grandchild born. Yes. Any other questions?
I've read 6 books since I had grandchildren born.
I beg your pardon, 6 books since grandchildren were born. 2 more questions. You keep that one, okay. Yes.
Did Archer Milton have any influence then? Archer Huntington have any influence on her? Archer Milton.
Well, I think did Archer Huntington have any influence? I think that the Mood family owned Brook Green so much earlier than the Huntingtons by 1930. Their paths had not crossed. The family here, the Chandlers, any idea if there was a connection between the Huntingtons and Julia?
Well, I mean, as you know better than anybody, there was that period between the plantations being owned by their original owners and the Northerners coming in and turning them into honey lots. And that was the Mood period.
Anything else? Help me thank Cokie Roberts. Thank you so much. And if you didn't hear Ms. Roberts, she mentioned the books are for sale up at the front, so make sure you stop by on your way out. I want to thank you again so much for being here, Ms. Roberts. I can't think of a better way to celebrate Julia Peterkin's legacy than to have someone of your renown be here to celebrate with us. So thank you so much. Take just a moment and ask the committee members to please come forward. The Women's Hall of Fame committee members, please come forward. We have someone very special to us too, and dear to this whole process, who's been with us from day one in creating the Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame. And she has decided that it's time for her to pass the torch on to someone else. But we would like to ask Wallace Hausman to please come forward at this time. And please join me in the thank you card. No, you still have a lot to offer to you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Wallace.
Actually, I played a very minor role because of all these delightful women who are on this committee. And I've enjoyed all of it, and it's been a boon to Georgetown. Good.
Thank you so much. One of the things we're very excited about this year is for the first time we videotaped our program. So this is one of our first steps in creating a virtual Women's Hall of Fame to preserve the stories of incredible women and to preserve these stories for generations to come. This will serve as a means and a channel to continually celebrate the individuality of each honoree and their contributions not only to Georgetown County, but to our world. So whether you're local or you're half a world away, you can learn more about Julia Peterkin and all the other women we have honored to this point. We have a special surprise also. We are going to give away a few books. Wendy Belzer with Brook Green Gardens was kind enough to donate a few books. And I don't know where it went. I think it's up in the front. Here it is, sorry. So we have 2 books, Scarlet Sister Mary. Thank you, Wendy, for donating this. We randomly generated numbers before the program started. So our 2 winners today are Diane Stern and Jane Curry. So we just moved up the desk at the end of the program.
also have one other gift we want to give away. Actually, we're going to do 5 of these. 7 years ago, my then 7-year-old daughter and I were making plans for spring break. We were discussing where we might want to go. Boston came up, and she was quizzing me as to why we might want to go to Boston. Saying, well, that's where we could go and learn more about our founding fathers. Well, she very wisely looked at me and said, what about our founding mothers? Where do I learn about them? So thank you, Ms. Roberts. We can now have a book to help teach our children about the wonderful contributions that women have made to our country. So we have a few people who are going to win copies of this. And please share this book with some special child in your life and help educate them and help them understand the critical role that women have played in our country. So, Becky Mooney, Paige Henry, Jean Cross, Judy Phelan, and Grace Osborne. You can pick up your copies of the registration. We also purchased other copies of this book, other volumes of this book, and we are going to donate those to all of the elementary school libraries in Georgetown County in your honor. So today, as we honor the legacy and gifts of Julia Mood Peterkin, we also celebrate those women who make positive difference in perhaps quieter ways. Whether it's a teacher, an artist, a mom, a small business owner, a volunteer, all of us are critically important players in enriching the fabric of our lives and our communities. So in closing, I'd just like you to think back to that old song that we all grew up singing, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." So let's receive that light from Julia Peterkin's taper and all those women upon whose shoulders we stand, and share that light with others. Because together we can light the way to a brighter future for our community and our world. Thank you so much for being with us here today, and God bless.